Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7 Israel's daily update. And in today's edition, we are going to focus on a number of issues. Israel has conducted multiple strikes against the Iranian proxy Hezbollah, which has been very proactive in rehabilitating its capabilities, not only beyond the Litani River, but also in breach and violation of the cessation of hostilities that was struck on the 27th of November of 2024 in entrenchment, of course, of various locations south of the Litani River and other aspects of the malign activities that this terrorist organization has pursuing. Next to that, we are expected to see a high-level meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and the de facto ruler of Damascus, Ahmed al-Shara, formerly known in his Al-Qaeda and Islamic State years as Abu Muhammad al-Julani. They are expected to meet in Washington on Monday at the White House, a first Syrian leader in history to be accepted into the Oval Office. That is quite significant by itself. Very strong messaging here. Next to that, of course, the Gaza Strip. Where are we currently with the latest developments? But before that, let's introduce our experts for today's panel, to include our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Next to him, Brigadier General in Reserve Yaron Rosen, formerly the IDF Chief of Cyber Staff, an Israel Air Force commander, a fighter pilot, among a long list of other positions today in the private sectors and elsewhere. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Nir Boms, who is the Middle East Director at the Moshe Dayan Center at Tel Aviv University, and a very active man with a long list of activities on multiple fronts throughout this region. But let's start with you, Mr. Oren, if we can focus initially on the most volatile theater, if I may. The Iranian proxy Hezbollah has been battered quite heftily yesterday in the most intense round of strikes that Israel has conducted since the cessation of hostilities took effect on November 23rd, or 27th rather, of 2024.
Yes, the good news, of course, is that the ceasefire is holding, at least in the Hezbollah decision not to retaliate for the Israeli strikes. The bad news is that Hezbollah is preparing for the next round, and even though they are absorbing the Israeli attacks, obviously at one point or another, when they see fit, according to the domestic situation in Lebanon, they will once again try to hit Israel through rockets, missiles, and perhaps even the Radwan force trying to conduct raids into Israel. Let me just add to what you recounted, a very significant, very memorable event which took place earlier today, and that is the funeral of the late Captain Omer Nautra, a dual citizen, an Israeli-American armor platoon leader who was killed, and then his body was abducted into Gaza on October the 7th, 2023. It was memorable, first of all, because finally, after some 2 years, his body was returned to Israel, and he had a very respectful funeral, but also because the commanding officer, in this case, commanding admiral rather than general of the Central Command, Admiral Brad Cooper, eulogized him in the funeral service, calling him a son of two nations, a hero of two nations, who ran towards the fire, protecting others, and giving his life in the process. This is probably the very first time a high-ranking American officer sees fit to give an Israeli soldier, a dual citizen, but he died wearing the Israeli uniform. And this is when the same Admiral Cooper is also running the Civil Military Coordination Center at Kiryat Gat, where 40 nations and organizations are already represented. We see a much heavier US and international presence in Israel vis-a-vis Gaza.
Thank you, Mr. Owen. First and foremost, may the memory of Captain Neutra, be or constitute a blessing, and may his family be blessed with a lot of comfort, since this is, of course, not easy, irrespective of the vile process that they had to experience with the abduction of the body of their son for such a long time. And with regard to Admiral Bradford Cooper, I mean, he is really the embodiment of a gentleman and a true officer in the U.S. Navy, but also in U.S. Central Command, that understands the full scope of sacrifice that the United States has gained from Israeli sacrifice. It might have been here specifically a lone soldier operating in defense of Israelis living in the land of Israel, where there happened to be also up to 700,000 American nationals living. But it's not about that. It's about intelligence sharing that spares many American lives. It's about many activities that are, of course, not brought to light for various reasons, but Israel has been very proactive in protecting Western civilization at large. It's not just the United States. It's European nations, some of which have been counterproductive to this relationship in recent months, unfortunately, in light of domestic pressures. But nonetheless, we can only stand on the sidelines and look at this situation and say there are men and women that are truly fighting for the liberty and for the protection of many people, not just in Israel, but across Western civilization. And with that, General Rosen, I'd like to ask you specifically, if we may, for a moment, also divert once more to the Lebanese theater, since the United States has been applying immense pressure on the Beirut government to disarm Hezbollah, to ensure that there is no threat to not just the state of Israel, but that it will bring about Lebanese sovereignty. This is a stateless country, a country that has been taken hostage by the Ayatollah regime, whose extension, of course, is Hezbollah. Just yesterday, there were once again a long list of sanctions imposed on Hezbollah by the Treasury of the United States. And there's a lot of activity that is being undertaken against this terror proxy, which is very much also a cartel that is operating very vigorously in Venezuela, in South America, is also active in American territory. And this has been a point of deliberation in a number of committees in recent days and weeks. And yet we are not seeing any improvement in the attitude of Hezbollah, forcing Israel to really ratchet up its offensive against this terrorist organization.
It takes time to kill the ring of fire. And I think people have to understand that, Israel has to deal with a few issues, and I want to focus on two of them. One is physical borders, like how does Israel protect itself in light of October 7th? But this was, from Israel's inception, a very important thing, like viable and defendable borders. And the second thing is how Israel has alliances and spheres and networks of influence. And we're post the high level battles of the war. The war is shifting now to diplomacy. Not that the war is over. I'll speak about Lebanon in a second, but now everything is about forming these alliances, and regional architectures are trying to be formed. And the declaration of Kazakhstan, everything is connected to everything, because we're talking about spheres of influence, positive to Israel, negative to its adversaries. And it's all about that, because everything now is unstable. And so you have to start from whatever you can just to create the, I'll call it for a second, American foreign policy dynamism. You have to create the momentum of positive peacemaking and stability. And how do you do that? You use whatever anchor you have, even if it's Central Asia, and it will somehow project southwards, southeast, southwest, into the other spheres that are important for Israel's stability. So if you look at it from that perspective, and you now focus on Lebanon for a second, it's really hard to take Hezbollah out of Lebanon, because Hezbollah is Lebanon, and Lebanon is also has a third of it is Hezbollah. The Shiites are about a third of the country. They're embedded in the Lebanese army. Everything it's a very, very sensitive and very unstable failed state. I won't say democracy. It's a failed state and barely alive. And I think that the diplomacy that we're seeing is trying to end or take the fierce battles that ruined a huge part of the Shiite part of Lebanon, the south, and in Beirut, as we saw, but now translating that to a diplomatic, stable Lebanon will still take time and a lot of diplomatic efforts coming from wherever the United States can, with the Israeli pressure, continuing to pressure from the military standpoint, Hezbollah, and that's what we're seeing. So it's coming from both areas now. Now more diplomacy, but still the military operations have not ended, sadly, because Hezbollah and Iran are still trying to resupply and rebuild towards Israel.
Iran is still a player. That is something that we can emphasize time and again. It's still a player. It's not rolling over and allowing Turkey just to fill the void without a fight. It's not going to allow Israel to push back and supposedly also fill part of the void in Lebanon in the event that the Lebanese government does indeed normalize its relations with Israel, something that the United States wants to see. And President Joseph Aoun has mentioned already that he is willing and keen on establishing dialogue. He did mention Israel in a framework of enemy state, which is also something that needs to be taken into account. But nonetheless, he understands full well that for Lebanon to be sovereign and to be capable to withstand pressures from the Islamic Republic of Iran, it also wants to see America's involvement and Israeli involvement at that. Now, let's touch for a moment on the Kazakhstan issue. Rather welcomed entry into the Abraham Accords. It was announced last night, or rather overnight, by U.S. President Donald Trump during a summit with leaders of Central Asian countries. Dr. Bombs, Kazakhstan used to be, up until yesterday, part of the Turkish sphere of influence. I'm pretty sure Ankara is not happy about this move.
Well, I think you used the most important phrase here, which is about the sphere of influence. And I think if we're looking at the 20-point plan for Gaza, it's also about a sphere of influence, because you also mentioned the multilateral dimension of the center already established in Kiryat Gat, and the fact that the mediators and the partners for this plan that was announced in that sense, actually in Egypt with one of the partners, has to do with that idea of sphere of influence. The United States is trying in its way under this administration to use diplomatic levers to increase spheres of influence, to create a larger coalition of the willing. Some of it is using diplomatic means, economic means. And yes, there's going to be some partners who may not be as happy as others, although Turkey and this administration seems to have a very strong relationship. I think for an Israeli perspective, the fact that Turkey may not be happy with some dimensions, there's not going to be so many people who will shed tears when it comes to this issue. But I think it's also about keeping a certain momentum. We very much hope here to have the continuing extension and engagement of additional countries in the, broadly speaking, Abraham Accord circle. Whether we would call it the Abraham Accords, whether it's going to be additional engagement, whether there are going to be some agreements that our partners will be able to help facilitate. All of that is about ensuring stability and security for the Middle East, stability and security for Israel. This is a shared objective that we share with the Americans. And I think, as our colleagues said, it is very clear that the destabilizers, those who would like to break this axis of stability, are not going to just wait in vain, and they will try to continue to destabilize. And this idea of bringing more countries into the Abrahamic Accord circle, into the American sphere of influence, is in a way creating a coalition of the willing to create a more stable region, a stronger American sphere of influence, and gives the United States the ability to continue to maneuver even with allies. And in that sense, Turkey is certainly a very strong ally at this point of the United States.
Absolutely. Of course, also one of the points that President Trump mentioned was that while many countries already wanted to join the Abraham Accords in the past, they were in a state of scare in light of the regional bully, namely the Islamic Republic of Iran, that was pushing back on this. Naturally, the Ayatollah regime's policy, it has a twofold policy. It's multifaceted, of course, but in its two main priorities, so to speak, is to push out the United States of the region and to expand its relations with its neighbors at the expense of the United States. So it goes hand in hand here. And obviously, the Abraham Accords works exactly against that top priority of the foreign policy of the Iranian regime. So in this context, we do understand that many countries were concerned that in the event that they would join the Abraham Accords, the regime in Tehran may operate against them, something that they couldn't potentially not withstand, particularly in regimes that are not as stable as the one in the UAE or in Bahrain or elsewhere. But Mr. Oren, when we're talking about the Iranians at this point in time, they are naturally at an all-time low with regard to their economy, their military prowess, and other aspects of this regime. Of course, a devastating drought is also plaguing the country of Iran, with a lack of water really causing them to act irrationally in the extraction of subterranean waters that are impacting Iran to the point where certain Iranian officials even are speaking about relocating the capital in Iran to a different city. When you look at that, and you also take into the account the growing effort by the Iranians to really shoulder themselves with the Chinese, how are we to interpret that?
Well, relocating a capital, as you know, St. Petersburg to Moscow, Brasilia, even if you mention Kazakhstan, Almaty to Astana, this in itself is not
unprecedented,
indicative.
Right?
Yes, but the strong words by Iranian officials have not been translated into action when they speak of never giving up their missile and nuclear programs. This is bravado regarding an uncertain future. Obviously, Israel, the United States, the IAEA, everyone is watching to see what they do. But if you look at the situation from Iran outwards, what do they see? They see that, contrary to the expectations, that during the Trump second term, there will be a withdrawal of American forces from the Central Command area of responsibility. The opposite is happening. Not only the Kiryat Gat center and the International Stabilization Force, which is coming to Gaza, but the same Admiral Cooper, whom we mentioned, has just launched a new initiative in Saudi Arabia, a national training center in the desert, which will be even more in line with the climate and terrain conditions here than the NPC at Fort Irwin in California, where the armored formations of the U.S. Army train. And this is, of course, a signal that the U.S. Is not only here to stay, but is willing to match whatever the Iranians have up their sleeves.
That is something that, of course, is also signaling to not only the Iranians, but also to the Chinese, to the Russians, to others. And General Wazen, when we're talking about this messaging aspect, since we are talking for the most part about staff officers, some contractors, particularly when we're talking about the training facilities in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and we are also hearing about potentially the United States recalibrating its pledge to withdraw from Syria and potentially even deploy a number of troops in Damascus. Having boots on the ground there, something that, of course, the White House has yet to corroborate, but nonetheless, there is a certain shift, as Mr. Oren insinuates. What are we to take out of that?
Again, I think there are a few levels of influence when we talk about what's going on here. Like, we spoke about how Israel needs to form these corridors of alliances and networks of influence. But right above that, we're a regional player. The United States is playing the global game, as you mentioned, with Russia, with China, and there's a connection between the regional level and the global level. Iran is resupplying Russia, and that goes to Ukraine, and the Chinese with Iran have their influence and their interests there, and it goes all the way to the Horn of Africa, of East Africa. So everything here is intertwined, the global level, the regional level. And what we're seeing exactly is exactly as we spoke about how Israel is trying to form these alliances and networks of influence, because the former administration sort of lost its grip in the region. And it became almost an unwanted entity in the region. Like, the leaders were not believing the president of the United States. That's a very, very bad thing from a regional perspective. And now the United States is rebuilding its presence. Presence means influence. Influence is also diplomatic and military, and that builds all the forms of national power that the United States applies, which is diplomatic, informational, military, economic, and cultural. And when all this is, well, if we will see persistence from the United States, which is a hard thing because of the political nature of democracies, and sometimes administrations change, but if we will see persistence, I think the global posture of the United States as the global leader of sanity and Western values will prevail in the next decade or two. But there's a lot of work to do in this region, because the region has exploded in the last decade for the good. I mean, we've seen a change from a lot of bad things, a lot of bad influences coming from the United States' weakness, and now it's changing with all the war in the last 2 years, but now in the direction of a much better posture for global stability in the United States and, of course, for Israel.
Not much time left for today's edition, Dr. Bomtiev. 1 minute, a bit less. But I'd like to ask you specifically on the Syria. There's going to be a meeting in the White House between Ahmed al-Shara and President Trump. The Syrian ask is essentially, please lift the sanctions. There is an Israeli ask in this context: maintain everything south of Damascus demilitarized and open a corridor as speedily as possible for the Druze to be able, and Christians there, of course, to be able to divert large amounts of humanitarian aid into the territory in light of a really deteriorating situation there. And the Turks are, of course, very keen on entrenching in Syria, but neither Israel nor CENTCOM are very keen on that. In half a minute, if you could give us an overview on that.
Well, I'm not sure they'll be able to sort all of this, but when we spoke about the sphere of influence and the fact that the very first time a Syrian president and a Syrian president with a somewhat of a controversial past, he is getting a lot of credibility, and he is getting also another ask. You have to make sure that the Syria project succeeds, that the Syria project will become a part of this sphere of influence, that the logic of the Abraham Accords will eventually come to it, that the rights of minorities are going to be kept, that the Iranians are going to stay out. And you will find that you will get more help if we'll see that Syria is advancing this way. And you will find that sometimes you will need to see some compromises and things that even in the southern part of Syria where Israel is operating, you will need to accept some of this, because there's a chance that you're not going to be able to do all of it on your own. And just like Hezbollah is not willingly going, there are other people who are not willingly going from Syria. I think these are going to be some of the issues discussed, and I hope that we'll be able to see some progress, or at least some announcements that may help progress a little later on.
Well, allow me to be skeptical still with regard to Damascus and with regard to the Iranians, as we mentioned, foregoing this territory to either Turkey, America, or anyone else. They want that territory, and the Russians have plenty of leverage over also the current Syrian leadership in Damascus. But this is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank Mr. Amir Oren, General Yaron Rosen, and Dr. Nir Bones for all of your insights. And I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem, wishing you a Shabbat Shalom.